can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. So Tony, then you got assigned to fly the B-1B. How did this come about?
Well, back in that time frame, in the mid 90s, 1990s, BRAC came through, base realignment and closure, and so I don't know exactly how the decision was made. I think I sent you a picture to revert back when we were doing the training in the F-16. There was that one picture I showed you. There were 70 F-16s, 70 on our ramp at one time. Wow. So we had 3 squadrons. Probably, I don't know anywhere else in the world that there were that many F-16s located in one location. But in any event, with the BRAC, they had to shut down some bases. I don't know how the decision came about. My thoughts are the B-1s at McConnell were on the active duty side of the airport. It was pretty convenient for us to inherit those, and they had to close something down. So I don't know, I'd use names, but I think it was the director of the Guard Bureau in D.C. at the time was General Don Shepard, and somewhere along the line, they made the decision to close our training unit down. We had a sister unit down in Tucson that flew F-16s and would transition the international students into the F-16. There was a test unit there as well. But it just so happens, coincidentally, that General Shepard had been the former commander of that unit down in Tucson. And here we are with, and I don't want to pound my chest, but we had all these seasoned F-16 instructors, mostly all full-time, from all different backgrounds of fighters, and they decided to close ours down and move it, our training operation, and move it down to Tucson. The airspace down there was already saturated with F-15s from Luke and 16s from Luke. You got DMUs in the same airspace. You got Yuma. And so, again, I don't know how it happened. It just happened. And so they stood up, I think, two more units with the B-1s. The Kansas Air National Guard was the first Air National Guard to ever fly the B-1. At that time, they had taken the B-1 out of the nuclear role and were trying to make it a conventional bomber. And I think, one of the other rumor mills you heard was, oh, well, these guys over at the Kansas Air National Guard, they're all fighter guys. They're going to make this B-1 into something bigger and better, which was partly true. The experience was there. But, unfortunately, Mike, as I said, there's 60 pilots, full-time instructors. After the first year of conversion into the B-1, there were only 15 of us left of those pilots. It was a very difficult transition because you're going to a single seat fighter. Everybody had their big egos, and you're going into a 4-place bomber. And people left. They went to other units. They retired. They went to fly airlines. It just was a difficult transition. But in any case, it worked out. We brought in new people. We had to bring in backseaters because you had people. It was a 4-crewed airplane, so. But in that regard, the unit shrunk down. But that's pretty much how we came about them. I mean, I think mostly it was because the aircraft were already located at McConnell. When we flew them, at that time, there was probably, they say they built around 100 B-1s. At the time we were flying them, there was probably in the 70s, 75 of them still flying. When we had them, and now they're down to 45 that are actually left flying. Actually, I take that back. They're down to 44. You may have heard about the accident they had up at Ellsworth Friday with the one that they lost. So we're down to 44. But in any case, that's how we we acquired them, and that's how they came about.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible aircraft, but what were your first thoughts on the Bone?
Well,
That sigh.
well, the first thoughts, obviously, again, I keep reverting back, unfortunately, that we were all fighter guys, and it was the last thing that we wanted as a fighter guy. Here we are in this bomber. To me, it was a neat looking airplane. Let's face it, it was a swept wing variable sweep, huge aircraft, and just in appearance, it was really cool looking. But once you started the training and getting into it, you found out really quickly what a lot of limitations were. Obviously, it was designed to carry nukes into the heart of the Soviet Union. And it did that very well, Mike. I mean, the thing had legs on it. It would fly forever. And at high speeds. I mean, we're talking, in comparison, the F-16 at the time I was in it, we would plan our low levels at 480 knots. What's that? 8 miles a minute. This thing did the low levels at 9 miles a minute. The turn radius, it'd take 13 miles to do a 180-degree turn. I mean, you're going so fast, and that was the thing to me that was most amazing about the aircraft was, I don't remember the numbers. I mean, we're looking back 30 years ago now, but it was probably, I think it was around, looking up the numbers, it's like gross maxed out weight, takeoff weight was 470,000 some pounds. And you had this huge hunk of metal going through the air at 9 miles a minute. And I mean, it'd go faster than that, but so that was what was most impressive to me. Obviously, the B-1A was first, and then that was a little bit faster. A supersonic bomber, the B-1B, it could go a little bit faster down at low altitude, but not at high altitude. And I think the speed limit was like 1.2 Mach or 1.25 Mach. I went supersonic in it once,
Right.
but it wasn't the supersonic speed. It was the fact that it could go fast at low altitude for a long time. Again, in comparison, a fighter type like an F-16, when we do plan a low level into a target area, you might hit a tanker first if you had the asset, drop down and do a 20, 25, maybe 30-minute low level to the target. Download it, made all the radars. The B-1, we would take it up in some of the northern states where we had these really long IR low level routes. An hour at 9 miles a minute. I mean, it's like this is just getting really boring. But you're flying that thing around. So in that regard, that was what was most impressive to me about it was the speed. And whenever we went to Nellis with it or whatever, these are big flag exercises with aircraft from all over the world, the Tornadoes and all those guys are flying underneath you. They would hug the earth. But even at that, they'd always put the B-1. It was such a big aircraft. Everybody could visually station keep off of it. Look, oh, there he is. He's 10 miles over there. They would station keep off of you, flying to the targets. And, they had the radars. The B-1 had an air-to-ground radar, but the air-to-air radar was not very good. So the guys behind you would be telling you where the air threats were. Okay, you need to drag out of the fight. We'll take them out, and you can pitch back and continue to the target. And so that was kind of the tactics. They'd always put us out front because they could keep us in sight. But we would have to slow down for them because they couldn't keep up. I mean, they could, but they were going to exhaust all their fuel in min burner or whatever, in and out of afterburner to stay up with you. So anyway, that was kind of my first impressions of it.
Yeah, and before we move on to like the nitty gritty of the B-1, I've probably mentioned it on the channel a few times. Where my favourite aircraft is a Tornado F3, and when they went to Red Flag, the B-1B guys used to say, "Okay, we're down level, we need some escorts," and they said to the F3 guys, "Can you keep up?" And they were like, "Yeah, of course we can." The wings back, and they were like, "Yeah." And I think that was the only jet that could keep up with the B-1B down level, which I thought was like fascinating because I thought the B-1B would be like, Yeah, you can't keep up. But the F3 guys actually kept up with it, which I thought was amazing. Did you ever fly with the F3 guys? RAF F3 guys?
No, I don't recall. I just know that there was a mix of all different aircraft at the flag exercises, and the tornadoes were always pretty interesting to see. But you'd see them go underneath you, or you'd cross over them or whatever. But that was about the max as far as flying with the RAF guys. I see you asked that question in previous interviews. Did you ever fly with anybody in the Royal Air Force? And I'm going, God, who could I say I flew with Britain? And you know what? I can say one person, and you've probably heard this person, has nothing to do with what we're, but have you ever heard of Nigel Mansell?
Oh, yeah. The race driver?
I was the Formula One driver.
Yeah.
So I took him from Wichita to Great Britain. Actually, we stopped in Iceland in the Citation. He bought a Citation jet from the factory, and I got to fly with him. Remarkable, fascinating person. That's a whole nother story, but just the nicest guy you would ever meet, and down to earth, a lot of fun. But as far as the British, that's about all I can say is Nigel Mansell.
Yeah, that's a great side note there, Tony. But yeah, let's talk about your flying and ground training. What was it like? Obviously working with a big crew now. Did you find it difficult, or how did you find that for yourself personally?
Well, like any training, everything's new, and I don't care how good you are or what you've flown in the past. Everything's a new environment, and you can stump the dummy in every new environment. So, what we did, it was a 6-month course.
Wow.
And it was a long course. And part of the reason for that was, as I recall at the time, their syllabus, they only had one syllabus, and it was for B course or basically people right out of pilot training. And so we had to go through the same course as seasoned pilots, which really wasn't fair to us, because there was a lot of stuff they could have skipped, but that was kind of the only syllabus they had. So we were in Wichita. The training was down in Dyess Air Force Base down in Abilene, Texas. So 6 months, basically you went down there, and the first 5 months were academics. You never flew the airplane.
Really?
Never flew the airplane the whole first 5 months. So you got 5 months academics, and it's like every course in the Air Force, they give you the stack of books like this high, and you're never going to read through all that. I don't care if you had 3 years. I mean, so you did the best you could. You went to classes. They threw in some simulators, towards the end, getting ready to fly, obviously, and as I recall, and then the last month, the 6th month, they had you scheduled to do 12 rides.
Right.
That was a lot. It seemed like.
Yeah.
But you had to do all the contact rides, the orientation rides, and then the pattern rides, and all the different types of training were broken up in those rides. There were some guys that they only got like 6 or 7 rides. The airplane would break. They never got it done, and they had to ship us back. If you went over 6 months in our Air Force, if you went over 6 months, it was considered a permanent change of address.
Really?
So you got paid differently, and so they kept us just inside the 6 months, so they didn't have to give us a PCS move.
Oh, yeah.
So we were just TDY. So in any event, that was kind of the gist of the training. A totally new environment, because the guys up front, there was the pilot in the left seat, the co-pilot in the right seat. Because we had all been instructors, we were there and we learned both seats. Kind of like in the airlines, you got the captain and you got the first officer. Well, we learned both seats. And then in the back, you had what were called the OSO, the offensive systems operator in the left back seat, and in the back right, you had the defensive systems operator. So to us, it was like, wow, this is just like the fighters, except it's broken down and everybody does each little thing individually. And the guys up front basically take off, put the gear up, fly it, put the gear down, and land. We really didn't do anything. It didn't seem like. I mean, then the other thing obviously is the air refueling. We flew it to the tanker and got there, sat there, got stable, and took the gas. But yeah, it was just so compartmentalized, and everybody was doing their own thing, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but because at the time it was much better. It was a big advance over the B-52 as a bomber, but for us, it was a step back in time, and it was just like, wow, we miss our fighters. We did everything in the fighter as a single operator in an hour and a half that you would do in this thing in maybe 3 hours or 4-hour mission, and it took 4 guys to do the same thing. So the OSO, the guy in the back, pretty much ran the offensive part of the aircraft. When we got in it at Dias, we didn't even have maps up front. We didn't even know where we were necessarily going. You would brief it, you would see it on paper, but they didn't even want you to have maps up in front. They didn't want the pilots to. The guy in the back steered the aircraft. It was all coupled up to the terrain following system. He steered it to the targets. He dropped the weapons. He steered it off the targets. You could literally be at your IP, the initial point, to the target, and you as the pilots up front, and again, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it was just the way it worked. You could see the target was over here at, let's say, 10 o'clock. And we're going straight. And the guy in the back, they can't see out. They've got little portal windows down below their seat, and they'd have to get out of their seats to even see. I mean, I felt really sorry for them because they're just stuck in the seat looking at these screens. Yeah. But he was steering the aircraft to the target, and you could say, hey, dude, I don't know what your radar is looking at as a reflector as far as, putting the symbology on the target. But the target's at left 10 o'clock. And you up front, you really couldn't do anything. He's back there, I envision madly, like we would in radar laydowns in the F-16 trying to find the offset. And he's probably back there trying, where's that? Why can't I see it? Because he's telling me up front we're not pointed at the target. And that's the way it operated. And the only thing you could do up front was say, okay, if you can't find it, we'll take over manually. We'll take the aircraft. We'll fly it. We'll point at the target. And it was just like a T-lar drop. I mean, you got within a certain distance, knowing what your speed and altitude was, and you'd go, okay, this looks about right. Pickle, and you knew the bomb was either going to go long or short of the target because you're flying right towards it. But other than that, you didn't know exactly where it was going to hit. It was all based on just a T-lar type of drop. And that's the best you could do. In the back, then on the right was the defensive systems operator, and I got to tell you that the B-1, at least when we had him, my impression it was pretty good in terms of negating threats. The defensive systems operator, he had some techniques where he could do a lot of really pretty neat jamming, and even when you would intercept the B-1 in a fighter, you had to fly a hot intercept. You couldn't lag behind or get behind it because it was fast. You could chase it down and you'd exhaust your fuel pretty quickly. But even when you got close with the radar on it, it would do some funny things with your radar. The TD box is locked on it, and it's like it won't lock on. It won't lock on. Mm-hmm. It really didn't matter if you're going to shoot, aim 9 heaters at it. If it's got the heat source, it's going to go to the exhaust. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he could do that. He would dump out the chaff. He would dump out the flares. Again, all that was done, by single seat guys. But that's kind of the mode of the guys that flew the aircraft. It was all weather, quote, all weather. You see what happened, and it's conjecture what happened up in Ellsworth, and we'll get into this probably later. But for example, you couldn't go through a cloud where the ice light would come on, at least when we were flying it. Right. You couldn't start the engines in visible moisture below freezing.
Oh, wow.
And you see, there's so many of these things. I don't want to be totally negative, but you throw all these out. The Air Force wanted something between the B-52 and the B-2 wasn't quite finished yet. They wanted that intermediate bomber thing, but in my opinion, it was never going to be a conventional bomber, and it still isn't a conventional bomber in terms of B-52s dropping bombs. It's limited on altitude.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into that in a minute, I suppose. But you asked in terms of what was it like in the training. It was long, arduous training. Finally, when you got to fly it, the first sortie, I'll never forget. We went out on the ramp. We got in the aircraft. Everybody's in their positions. We're getting ready to crank. There was some kind of a mechanical problem, and we sat in the airplane longer than we flew it.
No way.
But that was the way, you're coming from SAC. Well, it was Air Combat Command now, but that was a SACism thing. You stayed with the jet. You called the maintenance guys out to come look and see what the problem is, see if they could fix it. It took forever for them to come in. We sat in the airplane for 3 hours. We didn't fly it 3 hours.
What do you do in that time, that 3 hours? You just sit there and be like, did you watch the game last night?
Yep. Now contrast that with a guard. If we had problems, whether it be in a fighter or the bomber or any other airplanes, it's like, hey, it's broke. We need the maintenance guys to come out here. We'll go back into the crew ready room, and you call us when you get it fixed. But that was the different mentalities in different communities, and that's the way the bomber world in the active duty operated, at least at that time. And it's like, this is hideous. This doesn't even make sense. We could be accomplishing something, and they can call us when it's ready, and we'll come back out. But they didn't do it that way. So, on my check ride, I remember it took 2 sorties to complete the check ride, because I think when we came back to do the pattern work, we put the gear down, and we couldn't get the gear to come back up. So we landed and had to finish up that. But that was kind of what the training was like. A lot of systems, a lot of it was a very complex airplane, but it was kind of neat, and it was fun to fly. I'm not going to deny that. It just as a platform at that time. Now we'll talk about later on, but at that time it was not a very good platform as a conventional bomber, and I don't think it ever will be.
Right. I mean, I'm just waiting for the comments to come in below on this interview. So Tony, can you tell us about the cockpit and wing sweep? Was the wing sweep manual, and what was it also like taking off and burning that thing? Because I've heard it, I've watched it a couple of times at RIAT, and it's literally the loudest aircraft I've ever seen or heard.
Oh, yeah. Well, starting with the loud first, when they would do flybys, we'd go back to to our class reunions or a football game out at the Air Force Academy. If they did a flyby with the B-1, all the alarms in the cars, the horns are going off because it was just so loud. Many times I was, when we were flying them in the Guard, I was one of the airspace managers, additional duty, and we get calls all the time from farmers and ranchers that, man, you flew over and you ran my cattle through the fence. It's so loud, the cattle just take off and
wow,
get scared, and they would blame it on us. And a lot of times, no, that wasn't us. What time was it? Well, that was the active duty guys or something. But the cockpit and the wings, as I recall, again, we're looking 3 decades ago, the wings, you'd sweep the wings. There was a handle on each side of the cockpit up front, and you would pull the handle aft or forward to sweep the wings. The wings would sweep something like, I think they were stationary, like at 15 degrees normally for takeoff and landings and high altitude, slower flight. And then you would take off, what I recall, on departure, when you hit 350 knots, you'd sweep the wings aft, and they would go back to about 67 degrees. And that's the way you would fly your low levels and high speed type flight. When you went up to go get gas or air refuel or something, you'd sweep the wings forward. Had more lift, obviously, but so that's how it was all manual. And you got to realize too that every time you swept the wings, your CG was changing in that aircraft, and so pumps are working and moving the fuel from aft to forward as required based on where the wing swept was. So it was pretty complex in that regard. I never remembered there ever being any problems with the CG on the thing. Is all automatic in that regard, but you manually initiated the movement of the wings.
Was it like a bit like what an F-111 where it was, because a Tornado was down by a throttle, the F-111 was up by the canopy. Where was the wing sweep lever on the B-1B?
The levers, I think I sent you maybe some pictures. You could see them in some of those pictures. It was just a long handle with a little ball on the top of it. And
right.
They were identical on each side, and that's what you used to sweep the wing. I don't remember there being any intermediate positions. I think they were swept all the way aft or all the way forward.
Right.
I don't recall them being anywhere else. I know that I've talked to people. There's a pin that the wing is stationed to the fuselage.
Yeah.
Thing is like they say is huge, almost 2 feet in diameter. It's not solid, but and they have to put it in what is it? They have to freeze the
it and then it expands, doesn't it?
Yeah, they have to freeze it to get it seated when they first install it, so then it can expand because the tolerances are so tight on the thing, is what I understand. But that was pretty interesting. The other feature was the SMUX, the structural mode control system. SMUX they called it. Right. And those were those little fins that you see up in front.
Oh,
like
yes.
Shark.
Yeah.
And initially, I guess they didn't have those, but that aircraft longitudinally is so long when you start flying the low levels and you get into turbulence, you were putting a lot of stress on the airframe. So they put the SMUX system in, and those are like shark fins, and they would sit there and they would move to dampen out the aircraft as you're going over the ground. So that was really kind of interesting. You'd manually, I want to say you'd manually turn those on and off, because if you came up to high altitude to get gas or something, you could hear them kind of vibrating and buzzing. And it's like, oh, you switch those things off. We don't need them now. We're not going that fast. But they call that the SMUX. Yeah.
SMUX, right. Brilliant stuff. I mean, this is a part we're going to get into. So, yeah, what did the B-1B do well and not so well, especially in your time when you were flying it?
Well, again, I'll focus on the good. Like I said, the thing would go a long ways, Mike. I mean, it would, at 9 miles a minute, that's almost incredible. You're not going supersonic down low, but you're going right up against the wall.
Yeah.
And the fighters, even the modern fighters, the Block 40 and the newer F-16s, could super cruise without having to go into afterburner. But the problem you started getting into is, Mark 82 or Mark 84, they have wires that run through the fuse. And if the wingman, we typically flew line abreast, a mile and a half line abreast to check each other's six. And if the wingman got sucked back, he could catch up with you, but now he's really accelerating, not a lot, but he's speeding up. And what I understood is it would pull those wires out of the propeller that would arm the munition. So if that wire comes out, the bomb is still attached to the wing, the fuse spins up, so now the bomb's armed. And if it sees a deacceleration, i.e., let's say a bird or something small just hit it, it's going to blow up. Yeah. So they had problems with that. Obviously now, the F-22 and the 30, probably part of the reason the weapons are internal, because they go faster. So in the B-1, like I said, the strengths were its speed. And so we'll talk about, when I flew them for the time I did 30 years ago to date, once they got precision PGMs on, precision guided munitions, JDAM, that type of thing, with GPS, INS, once you got close to the target to where you could program in where you want the weapon to hit, it was King Kong, because the thing can sweep its wings forward, it can loiter forever, in the sandbox or wherever you are in the Middle East, and then they can give it a target. It can sweep the wings, it can dash over to the target, it can drop a few PGMs, and it was Mr. King Kong. They apparently would have one, airborne 24/7 over there. Wow. They put a lot of time on it. But early on, they didn't use them in Iraq because they just weren't ready, conventional bombing-wise. When we got them, I think we typically had 3 bomb bays. The forward bomb bay, we would always fly around with an extra fuel cell in there. Gave us more fuel. So the center and the aft, and they would hold, gosh, I want to say 28 to 500-pound bombs in each bomb bay.
Wow.
Okay, so the problem with it was at 9 miles a minute, they built these rotary racks that the bombs would be in, and they'd spin them, and the weapons would come out. There's just physically no way to eject the weapons fast enough going that speed. If it was a building target, you're going to get a whole bunch of bombs hit short of the target because you're going so fast. A few of them will hit the target, and then you're going to string out the rest of them. And so as a conventional bomber, just doesn't work. And they drop CBU and all kinds of things. Now with the PGMs, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. In addition to that, now they have updated all 4 of the stations with new avionics, radios, all that stuff's all new. They've improved a lot of things. So it's a whole new suite from when I flew. When we flew them, you had like an MFD that would be sitting in front of you, and a lot of the gauges were tape gauges. Yeah. So it was very difficult to read, at least compared to what we were used to, and more like glass cockpits are today. Very difficult. That was different. But that's what we had back then. When you drop down from altitude, you went through this litany of checklist items, and you're calling out 1,000 feet to level off, pilot, co-OD, level off, pilot, co-OD. I mean, it was this checklist of things like, wow, really, we got to go do all that. And it was a long checklist to get it down and coupled up. But once it's there, the ground map radar, even when I was flying, it was a very, very powerful ground map radar. And it could look out in front of you, and it could see telephone poles. And if you came up to a telephone pole and it saw it, depending on what kind of ride, I think there was a soft ride, medium ride, and a hard ride, it would hug real close, or a soft ride would kind of float. But if it saw a telephone pole, it'd fly right up over the telephone pole, back down on the other side. So it was really pretty incredible, and those guys in the back, they could break all that stuff out. Air-to-air wise wasn't very good. We had a raw scope up front, and to tell us where threats were looking at us at. But at the time, again, you depended on that because we didn't have anything else we could see up front. And if you saw a radar looking at you, it might present itself at the 1 o'clock position on the scope. But the way the thing was wired and the way it worked, you didn't know if it was at 1 o'clock or at 9 o'clock or 6 o'clock. So, are we supposed to be looking over here or back here? But that was some of the things about it. Like I said, you couldn't crank it when it was freezing. And again, I don't know what happened up in Ellsworth, but you're flying in freezing fog. Really? We took it out one time when we were at the flag exercises, another guy and I, and just kind of aircraft handling characteristics, and that's when I went supersonic in it. I recall you had to be above a certain altitude, 2,000 feet or 6,000. I don't remember what the altitude was. It's just you had to be at a certain altitude or above to go supersonic. And we pushed it up through and went supersonic for a little bit. And then you could really see the gas gauges. I mean, that thing had a lot of gas, but you could almost like, wow, this thing's really burning the fuel now.
Were you in blower, like when you were going supersonic?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
right, so you're in full afterburner, right?
Afterburner, yeah. And then, but the thing that really got my attention is we didn't have anything in the bomb bays. We just had the forward fuel tank. And again, I don't mean this in a bad way, but we swept the wings forward, climbed it up to see how high we could get. And once we got above 30,000 feet, it was like elephants jumping on the wings.
Oh, really? Wow.
That was it. And at that altitude, if you know anything about threats, you're in the heart of the surface-to-air missiles. You're right in the heart of the SAMs. Yeah. So, people believing that, it's going to take over the role of the B-52. No, the B-52 carpet bombed in Vietnam in the low 40s. So, it's as a conventional bomber to do what the B-52 did, I don't think you'll ever see it used in that manner. But it doesn't say it's bad. It just means in the right environment, like now, it's King Kong. It's like the A-10. You know, everybody wants to get rid of that, but man, you use it in the right environment. It's a great tank killer and that type of thing. And so, but how much do you want to spend and continue to spend on it? And, you know, are there other platforms that are better? You know, I always thought the F-111 was a great multi-role fighter. It's all weather and it's fast and could kind of like a fighter, but kind of like a bomber. But they trashed those as well.
But like, just on the side note here, Tony, did you as B-1B crews, did you ever swap notes with the B-52 crews, or were you completely separate?
Pretty much completely separate.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, never interfaced with B-52 crews.
Ah.
Really was never around them. Even in the flag exercises that we did, I don't remember.
Interesting.
Because the flag exercises, whether it be a red flag or a green flag, you had all these different aircraft and you did a huge mass briefing, and then you break up into your different cells, depending on what your targets were or what your objective were or your tactics, and then you break up into your individual, you know, your individual airplane and brief. So it was brief. You go out and fly, you come back and you do your little mini brief, and then a bigger briefing, and then the whole big package debriefing. And so it was an all-day affair every day for a week, 2 weeks at a time. But, I mean, I can tell you that was my demise. That's when I decided I was not going to continue with the B-1. And I can tell you that story if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Tony.
You know, a lot of us, like I said, we got reduced from 60 to less than 15 pilots that I knew at the time. And of those 15, you got to realize at least 5 of them were the leadership role. So they weren't really, they were the higher ranking guys. So there was very few of us left. But so that itself was an unpleasant time. But I really kept thinking, oh, I can go somewhere else and fly the F-16. And you're always trying to figure out ways to do that. And I achieved that. But once the opportunity presented, I didn't do that because I was going to have to move. But I decided I was done with the B-1 when we went to a flag exercise. And they were out there holding on the eastern part of the airspace. And we're in a holding pattern. And there were a bunch of other flights, you know, in different holding patterns, you know, whatever they might be. And we're waiting for the little mini war to start. And the warlord, he was an F-16 guy who's out there, he's checking the weather, and he calls back to everybody and says, okay, the ground war is called off. It was shitty weather, but the high war was going to continue. The air-to-air war was going to continue. You had all these assets out there. So I asked the guy, I asked my co-pilot, I said, hey, dude, ask the guy, asking if we can go TF, train follow, to the target. It'd be great training for us. Mm-hmm. And the guys in the back will get to listen to the air war. We'll get to know where the threats are off of a geo-reference bullseye. They're going to call them out, and we'll know where we're at, and we'll drag away if we think we're going to get shot, or we'll continue to the target. Well, keep in mind, we had planned to have an EF-111 be on our wing about 2 miles line abreast, because he's going to go in there and sweep and jam all the ground threats for us so we can get in. Well, so the ground war is called off, and the warlord said, yeah, you guys can go in and train follow to the target or whatever. Well, the EF-111 has the same capability, so we both drop down and we go.
Wings back.
We're booking along, wings are swept. This is King Kong, and we're going in and out of weather over huge ridges, you know, in that airspace. And it wasn't very long after we dropped down, and all of a sudden the B-1, if the ground map radar was having a problem train following, you'd get an audio beeps in your headset, and you go beep, beep, beep. And the worse it got, the more frequent the beeps would go. So eventually it'd go beep, 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 and it'd be solid. And then the ground map had broke lock or couldn't train follow anymore, and you were coupled up, and the jet would just start climbing, and it would pitch all the way over on its back if you let it.
Whoa. But
it would just start a gentle climb up. And at 30 degrees, the procedure was, as I recall, 30 degrees, you'd couple it off, you decouple it, take over manually, throw all 4 engines into afterburner because you want to get away from the ground in separation because you don't know what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And get to a safe clearance altitude. So it did that. Took over and flew it up and leveled off. I go, okay, what's the problem? And keep in mind, we're still hauling ass towards the target. We're listening to the air war up here. And I'll be darned, the last thing I want to do is just drive straight into somebody's AIM-7 or something, where I don't want to get shot. So, he says, nothing, everything checks out normal back here. So I said, all right, let's go through the checklist. And that checklist, just to set everything up, is like a couple minutes or a minute at least. They have to go and do all their little thing and flip all it. Okay, we're ready to start letting it down. You let it down, gets back on track. 20 seconds later, beep, 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 beep. Brakes lock, up we go again, another fly up.
Oh my God.
Level off. I go, dude, what's going on? And we're trying to listen. Where's the threats? Where are the air threats? And everything checks out normal back here. So I said, okay, we're going to couple it back up. Go back down. Again, beep, 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 the third time. I said, dude, I don't know what's going on. The threat's getting really close. We're not going to get bourgeois because we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
I was going to make a hard turn to the right, a 90-degree turn to the right. And unbeknownst to me, all these other fighters, even though they hadn't been really cleared and they're not all weather at all, they're kind of going in and out of clouds. They go underneath of us. They were trying to follow us just because they wanted some training too. And they go underneath of us. And anyway, we go up north. We turn around and come back to Las Vegas and land.
Oh.
And by the time we get into debriefing, I don't know, I was a lowly major at the time or something, and this lieutenant colonel's there, and he's going, yeah, I don't know where that B-1 from Kansas, man, they were way off the black line. They weren't even close to it. And I got kind of testy at the time. That's BS, man. And I said, I looked at him, and I know he outranked me. I didn't care. I said, you know what? First of all, what were you guys even doing out there? The ground war had been called off. What were you guys doing trying to station keep off? It got real quiet. And he just completely shut up because they knew they were in the wrong. They shouldn't have been there doing that. And so that just stopped him. And then I get over here my OSO and DSO, and you'll recognize this, talking to the EF-111 guy.
Oh, yeah.
And the EF-111 guy goes to the OSO and he goes, hey, by the way, what channel were you running your ground map radar on? So we were using the same frequency as the EF-111 or vice versa.
Right.
And their side lobes were jamming our ground map radar, causing the fly-ups. And I go, you know what? This platform's been out for at least 15 years, and this is the first time anybody's recognized that.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I'm done. I wasn't that interested in it at the time anyway, and I said, I'm done. And that was pretty much my last flight.
So that flight, you just knew that was, I'm done with the B-1. And
somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And this ready to be sent to war. If this is, at least with my past experience, we don't even know this. And again, you got to backtrack. The B-1 community, their tactic to go to a target, first of all, and again, now we're getting into the negatives, but it was very hard to make the B-1 crews understand. First of all, you're not going to drop from high altitude. I mean, you can't get that high because you're in the heart of the SAM sites. Well, we'll drop down low and we'll train follow to the target. Okay, well, on a desert background, you guys are a big dark plane form. If a fighter up at altitude sees you, you're dead.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Our wings are swept. They will never catch us. Well, they didn't understand. The fighter's converting all that altitude to speed. They will catch you.
Catch you, yeah.
And they will kill you. Oh, we'll do it at night then. We'll train follow to the target at night. Okay. So then the next tactic was they always, at the time, now it's changed because people convinced them, but they would always go on an 8-mile lead trail. Okay, so the lead bomber and the rear bomber. So imagine this. Lee goes over the target, drops all of his weapons or whatever on the target.
Yeah.
The DSO's dumping out chaff, puts out all that chaff. What do you think the trill bomber is going to see? The ground map radar is going to see all that chaff. It's going to go beep, beep, beep. You're going to do a fly up in the middle of the night, 4 Roman candles and afterburner, and every gomer on the ground is going to see you.
Yeah.
And, they wouldn't even, at the time, they wouldn't even come in from different axes. They were always a lead trill tactic.
Right.
And so we finally convinced them, let's come in at different times, at different axes. Let's not follow the same black line. So it just took a while to progress to that. But again, I tell you, going those speeds with a dumb bomb, so to speak, you just can't get them out fast enough to really do any damage on more of a pinpoint target. Maybe on a runway, creating a runway because it's long, it would be a good target, but you just have to be careful of what you're using it for as a conventional bomber. So that was my side note as far as the story. It's unfortunate, but again, I say now, look at it. It's King Kong in the desert. It can loiter. It can dash to a target. It can pinpoint targets. It can drop on them. So again, used in the right environment, it's very capable.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up the B-1B bit of this interview, Tony, what was it like working with a full crew? Like, did you find it easy to get on a professional level, and what was it like on a social scale as well, if you were on Red Flag, for instance?
No, you learn very quickly that you operated as a crew. The more, not disappointing, but the more challenge was, again, we felt like as former fighter guys, we used to do all this, but the guys in the back, I didn't learn their systems in the back. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that seat. I didn't know the defensive systems operator seat. I know what they did, but as far as working with them, you trusted each other. They were just like your wingman or your flight lead. You trusted them. You expected them to do their thing. There was examples, a little bit of disappointment. I would have thought that, the guys in the back would have known that don't run the same channel that the F-111 guy is going to be jamming all the threats on. Mm-hmm. But that's how you learned. Mm-hmm. That's the whole learning thing. But professionally, everybody got along pretty well in that regard. Hold that question maybe for the KC-135. That was a little different. But you were aircrew. They weren't pilots necessarily in the back, but they were the operators. Mm-hmm. The pilots were up front. But you learned, just like a Wizzo in an F4 or a 2-seat fighter back, the older fighters, you depended on them. They got you to and from the target.
So overall, did you enjoy your time in the B1, and how many hours did you get, Tony?
I only flew it for about a year and a half, so I had a little over 300 hours, which really wasn't very much. Did I like it? It was a fun airplane to fly, don't get me wrong. Like I said, it was really cool to be able to go that fast with that huge hunk of metal. That's all I remember. Those 4 engines. I mean, One engine was the equivalent. Basically, it was the F-16 or the Eagle engines were derivatives of, I think, that F-101 engine, 30,000 pounds of thrust or something. Mm-hmm. And it would just go it would just go so fast. And you didn't have to really worry about the fuel like you would in a fighter. I mean, you were constantly checking your fuel in the fighter. Okay, am I Joker yet? Am I bingo? We need to RTB, go back, return to base. And the big bomber seemed like you always had plenty of fuel. So, yeah, that was not something. It was fun to fly. I'm glad I got to fly it. It wasn't the best mission at the time because we just didn't feel like we were very go-to-war capable. At least I didn't, because we weren't at that time. So, but it was fun to fly. It was a fun airplane to fly. Easy airplane to fly.
So, obviously you went on to fly the KC-135. Can you tell us about this and your experience of flying that aircraft?
Again, the active duty took back the B-1s. We flew them and the Georgia Air National Guard. In fact, the guy that you interviewed, he was a I think they flew F-15s at Georgia. You interviewed that
Yes,
guy.
yeah.
Really, really interesting interview. I
Yeah.
enjoyed listening to that. Really nice guy there. But they flew him, and then the active duty took him back. And, every guard unit wants to keep their flying mission. So we had a sister unit in Topeka that flew KC-135s. And so apparently the leadership agreed, hey, we want to keep our guys flying. We'll do tankers. And so we inherited the KC-135s. They also flew KC-135s, tankers on the at McConnell on the other side of the base, 2 parallel runways. We were on the west side. Active duty was on the east side. So we inherited the KC-135. And again, a totally different community in terms of mentality from bombers and fighters and attack. But overall, I actually enjoyed flying that. Not flying it, but the fact that we were able to go places and land and get out. Backing up in the B-1 under the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the Soviet Union, they wanted to know where our nuclear assets were at all times. So when you took off on the B-1, you were coming back to the home drone. If you diverted or wanted to plan to go somewhere else, it was a big deal. You'd have to have our leadership called they'd have to contact the Guard Bureau in Washington, D.C. You'd have to tell them where we're going. Even if we deployed to Red Flag with it, you had to go through all those steps. So you were in agreement with that treaty. So in regards to the KC-135, you didn't have to do that. And you got to go a lot of places in the KC-135 because you weren't just offloading fuel to the receivers. You were hauling passengers or cargoes to a lot of places while you were doing that as well. So you got to go and land at places. So I actually enjoyed that from that perspective more. It wasn't necessarily a funner airplane to fly, but you did a lot more. You felt like you accomplished something when you came back from the mission. You at least passed gas to a receiver. I know what it's like being on the other end when I need that gas. So, that's how we got the KC-135. Basically, they wanted to keep us flying, and that was the next best thing. And a lot of guard units converted to the tankers. The active duty wanted to point those aircraft back. I think, like when we had the F-16, I told you we had 70 of those things on the ramp. I think the active duty actually kind of resented that. We didn't own the aircraft. The active duty owns it. The guard units are controlled by the governor of each state. But the active duty's going, why does a guard unit get all those F-16s, and that was kind of the cat's meow. So they took the pointing those things back, and a lot of times the guardsman, a traditional guardsman or reservist, is a part-timer, as most people know, and they came off active duty generally, and so they were kind of held in reserve. But then, I would say when Rumsfeld came along, those kind of guys, they realized that we need more support on the front lines, and so they started integrating the reserves and guards into the active duty, which really wasn't the concept of those units, but it was more efficient for them. And now you see the guards and reserves working with the front lines all the time. So, but in answer to your question, that's how we got to the KC-135.
So you kind of mentioned with the B-1B crew we mentioned earlier. So what was it like working with a 135 crew on a professional and social scale?
I would say there was more separation because you had the pilots up front, and typically you'd have a boom operator to offload the fuel, and one or two other guys in the aircraft, the enlisted guys in the back, and you got initially you got into this officer enlisted not butting heads, but they would be in their little group and the pilots would be in their little group. And it wasn't like a fighter or even a bomber squadron where there was more unity initially. It got better over time, but at least in our guard unit, it seemed like that was kind of a conflict. But again, you relied on them. I mean, they ran the stuff in the back as far as get the fuel to the receivers. They did all the pallets. They did most of the hard work, the physical work. The pilots would, here's where we're going, fill out the flight plan, get the weather, get the NOTAMs, go to base ops, file it, come back. Okay, here's where we're going to go. We're going to go to this AR track, so-and-so. We're going to do a point parallel rendezvous with the receiver or a fighter turn on, and that's about as difficult as it got. It was a lot easier, but it was fun because you could go to different destinations, go out and party and whatnot. So.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. So, I mean, you probably refueled a lot of aircraft, but can you tell us what your favourite aircraft was to refuel, and did you get anything, in quotes, exotic that you would never normally see?
A lot of fighters, the different fighters, the 15s, the 16s, and back then, the boom operators, the F-22 had come out, and I kind of distinctly remember, typically you might be holding in your orbit, waiting for the fighters to come up, and you knew what your contact time was for them to be behind you. And again, it depended if you were going to do a point parallel or a fighter turn-on type of rendezvous with the receivers, but if it was like a fighter turn-on where they're going to basically intercept you and roll out behind you, it was kind of an evolved thing. And I can remember the boom operator would be up front kind of talking to you, and you would see we had a kind of like a raw scope. We could put the IFF setting into it and get the IFF settings for the receiver, and we could plug them in. And that thing, unlike our little typical fighter radar warning scope, this thing could see 100, 150 miles away. Wow. So we knew where the receivers were, which is a great aid, what azimuth they're coming to. And so he'd be up there and we'd be chatting, and he said, okay, well, it's probably about time to go back because they're gonna be back behind us pretty soon. So he'd wander his way back there to the back and get in his little platform to operate the boom. But then when the F-22 came along, they had to get kind of a special checkout because it was a newer aircraft. But I can remember one time he goes, oh my God, the F-22s, they're already behind us. And that was the thing that you noticed about, like, for example, the F-22, the speeds again, the timing was different. And it's like, oh, I thought I had time to get back there. Dude, they're already back there and wait for you to get back there. So that was kind of unusual. The B-2 was out of Whiteman Air Force Base, which was relatively close to where we were at McConnell in Kansas. So we refueled them a lot. I don't know if exotic is the word, but they were kind of interesting to refuel. It's no secret that they had, different types of reflectivity on their aircraft, and boy, they were really concerned about it. If there was any thunderstorms within 40 miles, don't take us there. And they would typically tell us, hey, turn us this way, that we need to go this way. Like, oh, dude, wow. We're 40 miles away. We're not, but depending on the winds aloft and stuff, hail can go a long ways and drift down. And so they just didn't want to be anywhere near the weather. Got ya. Which was like, wow, okay. That's how protective they were of it, and rightly so. Yeah. But no, the F-117s, we would go down to to Holloman, and they would come up, it seemed like, in pairs. And they were kind of autonomous ops. They would do things not necessarily, once they got as a two-ship, then they would split off as singletons, and they were always kind of single. And most of the times we would refuel them. It seemed like it was always nighttime. And they were kind of unusual, and it took a little bit longer because they weren't as fast. And where are you at, when you – but no, we refueled any and everybody. It was just to me, it was a more satisfying type mission because I felt like we were really doing something at the time. And again, I don't mean that to badmouth the bone, because now, like I said, it's very effective in what it can do with PGMs. But man, when we had it, whew.
But there we go. So how long do you spend on the 135? And I'm guessing, obviously, from what you just said, you really enjoyed it.
See, I left Cessna and I went to fly airlines, UPS. I came back and tried to get back into the unit again. I went actually into the reserve unit here at McConnell. We had guard, reserve, and active duty. They had tankers, and they couldn't get me a training slot. And so I went back over to the guard. That was about the time they were losing the B-1, and they were also gaining the KC-135. And I go, well, I'm waiting for a training slot. And so they took me back in, and from there we did our training down at Altus, much shorter than the B-1 training. And it was much closer. So on weekends we come home. Fortunately, I was paired with Ray Conley was his name. He's flying for FedEx right now. The guy was active duty. I was paired with him. One of the sharpest crew members that I've ever been around. Really sharp. And so I went through training with him. We drive back together every weekend to see our wives and family. And but he was just really good, kind of pulled me through. His objective, I want to get an EQ on my check ride. He was still in active duty and wanting to do well. EQ is exceptionally qualified, when they give you a check ride. And sure enough, we got EQs, and he went on his way, and I came back to the guard and flew it there. I went back in 2002, got back on full time, and for almost the next 5 years, till 2007, when we lost the KC-135, they took that from us. So for almost 5 years, I flew it. Probably, I don't know how many hours, no idea, because I had my airline job. I don't care about hours anymore.
Fair enough.
Who cares? But I flew it for almost 5 straight years, and we'd fly at least a couple times a week, maybe 3 times, but
nice.
At least 2 times. And it was always fun because you were just cruising up. There were a lot of air refueling tracks around here. You're in the middle of the country, and or you might fly a little ways somewhere else to pick up receivers. But gosh, if I'd have known during the fighter days how easy it was to orchestrate getting tanker support, I'd have got a lot more tanker support because more gas, more flying time. But,
yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, that was the gist of it. The training was typical. I mean, you did your basic initial flights in it. You did your pattern work. You did your instrument work, and then you started going like you were doing a real mission. You would go to an air refueling track and rendezvous with the receivers, and then you'd come home.
So we've got a question from one of our patrons and a couple of personal questions to wrap up this interview, Tony. So this one is from Joe Kunzler. Did you ever get to drop precision weapons out of the B-1B?
No, I did not. Never. We weren't that far along yet. It was just typically Mark 82s, which, and I don't even know if I ever even dropped Mark 82s. You got to remember, we were in the early stages of conventional bomber conversion with the B-1. So they were still trying to get the racks to work right in there to hang the weapons on, and they would spin. And typically, for the guys in the back that actually did the weapons releases, we'd go to the range and drop the little 35-pound blue BDU on the target, and that's what we used for training. And then you might go to the Utah Test Training Range out in Salt Lake and drop inert heavyweights. But I don't remember ever really dropping anything, and that's why I say it was such a long mission. And you were trying to get training for everybody, even the DSO, the Defensive Systems Operator. There was some type of a radar emitter site in La Junta, Colorado, and you might plan the mission. Okay, well, you guys got your training. Let's fly all the way to La Junta now, so we can overfly the site, and he can get some jamming and do his jamming techniques or whatever. So, but no. In answer to the question, never did drop a precision munition off me.
Well, thanks for answering that question for our patron there. But yeah, so to wrap up here, Tony, do you have any hobbies?
Yeah, I mean, I still like to fly. I've got a light airplane. I fly general aviation. I've got an experimental I fly around, a little biplane. I really like ultralights now. And I think, I don't know if I think you saw that video of me on Facebook. It's called a laser. It's kind of like a little glider. It's got two 9.5 horsepower Rotax engines. And as far as flying and a hobby, that's what I most like to fly now. It's very, very peaceful. I like local historical things. I restored an old bank, a 1905 bank in my little hometown, and made a little coffee shop there. I like to travel a little bit and fish and that type of stuff. But yeah, just living life. It's fun to be retired.
Absolutely. I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to let you answer it. Favorite aircraft you've flown, Tony?
Obviously the F-16. I mean, again, I revert back. It was a way lot more work, but your hair was on fire, your teeth are hanging, and it was just a lot of fun. A lot of risk, but a lot of fun.
Absolutely. One you wish you could fly either past or present?
I've heard you ask that question in the other interviews, and I thought about it, and at first I was going to say maybe the F-22 because it's state of the art. The F-35, I don't really have a lot of appeal for that. I think it's limited, even though it's very high tech. But the F-22, my last student I had in F-16s, he was right out of pilot training. He retired as a 1-star, and I've chatted with him about it, Scott Croxton, and they would operate in the 50 to 60,000 block, and the speeds that they could get up to that altitude with, and the radar was just incredible. I mean, contacts in the F-16, you might pick up 20 to 30 miles out, depending on the size. This thing, we're not talking tens, we're talking hundreds of miles, and they could have their targets targeted and sorted when they're in the arming area hundreds of miles away. So the technology is fantastic. You can only imagine an F-35. But in answer to that question, what would I like to fly past or present? The F-22, and then another guy, I've been over to Mildenhall. I've jump seated Space 8 on the tanker a lot out of McConnell because they have a rotator every week that used to go into Mildenhall. So I've been over there 2 times, Aviano another time. So 3 times I've taken hops. But when we were in England, we went to Duxford. Nice. And so the Spitfire would be kind of cool. Just a nimble little fighter. And then, I always look back and it'd be kind of nice it's always intrigued me is the SR-71. I wouldn't want to do that mission month after month because you're sitting there in long periods, but to say you flew that thing, pretty incredible. So, not one distinct answer, but those would be kind of the airplanes. I've ridden in the P-51, and it's got its pros and cons, and it's fun too. But the Spitfire, I think, would probably be high on my list.
Over the P-51? Right, okay.
Yeah, because I know what the P-51 is. I've heard people that have actually flown it. It's very, it takes more stick input, to fly it than they thought it would. Whereas I envision, you see in a museum, you see a Spitfire hanging up there. It's very small. It's probably obviously a lot lighter and very maneuverable and very nimble. So I just love to see what it's like to fly it. The P-51 is still fabulous as well. When I took a ride in a P-51, I'll tell you that story real quickly, but I wanted to have my last flight in a fighter. And the Air National Guard at Kansas, the first fighter they flew was a P-51, and the last one was a tanker. So I orchestrated a photo shoot. We took 2 tankers down. One had the camera guy in it, and I took off in the back seat of this P-51, and we rejoined. So we had both the first and last aircraft, and we got pictures of it looking like the P-51's receiving gas off the tanker and everything. But I was kind of like not amazed, but disappointed that the P-51 up at altitude didn't seem like it could accelerate that fast or had that much power. Well, the owner probably wasn't wrapping it up like it was, but I can tell you when we came back to the pattern and did some low high-speed passes, it was almost like strafing in an F-16. You know, you typically strafe 300, 325 knots, and we were coming over the airfield. It seemed like at least the ground rush, as I recall, was we're booking along. But that particular P-51 was called Sweet and Lovely, and it went to Oshkosh, which is our big air show here, and took grand champion of all the warbirds one year. And then they got the grand champions together, and that particular aircraft took first place of all the grand champions. And it was probably Bob Baker was the one that had it. He built 3 of them, and he sold them both. And that particular aircraft took first place in its class at the Reno Air Races 2 or 3 years ago. And then more recently, it took like 3rd place. But so it's a very capable aircraft as well, especially obviously in its day. But again, just because I'd never flown or been around the Spitfire much, you hear so much about it that that'd be kind of neat to get a ride in or fly or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing a bit about your story. I'm sure our viewers are going to absolutely love it. But yeah, thanks again, mate.
Well, thank you so much. I hope your viewers enjoyed it, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Gets the word out. It gets the people to be able to see what Aircrews do and all different types of aircraft. So thank you very much for your business that you have.
Cheers, Tony.
All right. Take care. Cheers to you. Thank you.